Hello and welcome to South Asia Chat, brought to you by the Institute of South Asian Studies at the National University of Singapore. I'm your host, Ronojoy Sen, Senior Research Fellow at the Institute. The violence in Lakhimpur Kheri in Uttar Pradesh earlier this month, which led to the death of 8 people, including 4 farmers, has been grabbing the headlines over the past few days. In the latest developments, Ashish Mishra, the son of Union Minister of State for Home Ajay Mishra, who also represents Lakhimpur Kheri in the Lok Sabha, has been arrested on murder charges in the violence case and has been remanded to 14-day judicial custody. His arrest comes 5 days after he was named in an FIR after his speeding car allegedly mowed down at least 4 farmers protesting against a statement by his father. With elections in Uttar Pradesh scheduled early next year, the incident has resulted in intense politicking and the opposition has mobilized around it. To discuss the incident and its implications, we have with us Gilles Verniers, who closely follows Indian politics and particularly Uttar Pradesh. Professor Verniers is Assistant Professor of Political Science at Ashoka University and Co-Director of the Trivedi Centre for Political Data there. His research interests include mechanisms of representation and participation in India, state politics, democratization in South Asia, sociology of elected representatives, controversies and problems in India's democracy, ethnic and post-identity politics, minority politics, and political parties. The list could go on. Gilles completed his BA in Economics, Social and Political Science from the University of St. Louis in Brussels. He earned his MA in Political Science and Social Sciences with a specialization in International Relations from the Catholic University of Louvain, or the UCL, in Belgium. He completed his PhD in Political Science from Sciences Po, I think I'm not pronouncing it correctly, which is affiliated with the Center for International Research and Studies, CERI. Thank you, Gilles, for joining us today. You've written about the UP government's reaction to the incident in Lakhimpur and what you called its disregard for democratic norms. Could you elaborate on this?
Yes. So, first of all, this is not the first time that such an incident happens. It's, closeness with an election, involvement of the son of a minister, a union minister, and the fact that those farmers that were attacked and not, members of minorities or impoverished Dalits, makes that there's a combination of factors that draw more attention on this particular event. One must also say that there's a culture of impunity that has been part of the political culture in UP for a long time. Those who remember the BSP regimes or the SP regimes, they were also marked by incidents of elected representatives flashing guns, shooting at people, political murders, violence, and so forth. What makes the current period in this particular incident and the string of incidents that have happened over the past few years distinctive to my mind is the fact that the violence is not just associated with simply electoral politics or the kind of petty criminality that is characteristics of UP, but it's associated with a political project sponsored by the state. Precisely in a state which is already known for its poor law and order record.
Just to sort of move on to, outside of UP to this reaction of the central government, the central government has been largely silent on the incident, despite a central minister's son being at least linked to it, if not involved. And there's been some talk that such incidents are not treated equally by the media in intelligentsia. And I'm referring to the Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman's remark made, I think, yesterday in the United States. So what are your views on this, the silence of the central government?
So we've seen that in repeated occasions, that the government, Prime Minister maintain a studied silence whenever the violence that occurs sort of fits into their political playbook. In the case of the Lakhimpur Kheri incident, the Prime Minister was actually present in Lucknow the day after the incident, and he did not say a word about it, right? He was there celebrating the Chief Minister, but not a word was mentioned about the incident. The very fact that one of his own minister, at least his son, was involved in the event. The social media associated with the BJP also focused more on the BJP workers who were killed and on the burned vehicles, and not so much on the initial attack that led to the counter-violence in the first place. And that's a pattern that we have seen with many incidents of lynching, public beatings of Dalits or Muslims, also with rapes, which were covered, by the media. Ministers and party officials usually raise their voices, usually only to accuse the opposition of seeking to politicize such violent event. So this really fit into a pattern that we have seen for quite some time. And one must also mention the opposition, who is not blameless either. It's true that there is an element of selected outrage when it comes to reacting to such violent events. Just to give you an example, over the past few weeks, there has been a spate of targeted killings of civilians in Kashmir, and that has not drawn as much reaction from opposition parties. In this case, obviously, they cannot point at, directly at the state as being responsible for those violence, since those killings were perpetrated by alleged, militants. But you do not see them, rushing to victims' families to provide them comfort or using these opportunities to score points against the government. So there is an element of manipulation, there's an element of instrumentalization of shocking events and tragic events on both sides, on the government side on one hand, but also on the opposition side on the other hand.
Right. Since you mentioned both the government and the opposition and the failings of both, could I just now sort of move on to the question of the impact of this incident on the Uttar Pradesh elections, which, as we all know, is scheduled for early next year? Do you believe this incident and the way it's been handled could have an impact on the elections next year?
So, first of all, we do not know with precision what exactly affects electoral outcomes in general. I mean, as you know, we don't have a very good, we don't have a functioning voting theory about India. Electoral behavior is not something that we understand well for lack of data, but also because something that characterizes Indian voters is the unpredictability and the ever-changing character of their electoral behavior. And second, I usually don't risk, doing predictions because you also know very well it's a very risky business in the Indian context. But one can still make, an assessment, and the assessment would be quite measured because one can predict. I mean, one can say that yes, obviously this event, tied up with other, violent events that have occurred, in UP over the past few months, over the past few years, sort of add up, provide to the opposition an opportunity to make absence of law and order a campaign issue, particularly when the chief minister in power, Yogi Adityanath, makes a tall claim about being tough on crime and being effective, on crime. That being said, and like many other factors in Indian politics, the effects that might be generated by this event are likely to be very diffused, right? I can give as an analogy the case of the migrant who literally walked back to Bihar during the first wave of COVID more than a year, almost 2 years ago now, where it was thought that, these many thousands migrant workers going back to Bihar soon before a state election would have an impact on the outcome. And it's probable that many of those migrants and their families and friends and relatives, would nourish deep resentment against the government. But the fact that they came from every district of Bihar basically ensured that the effect of their discontent was really diffused. And when it comes to elections are never fought around one particular issue, or they're not even fought around, big personalities exclusively, as we are sometimes, made to believe. And so whatever impact this event might have on the campaign, it can give a jolt to the opposition, it can give a jolt to the farmers' movement. We can talk more about this. But my sense is that the effect is likely to be diffused, and therefore not determinant on the outcome next April.
Right, that's measured, but also an excellent analysis of the inherent unpredictability of voting behavior and the diffusion of impact of several similar incidents. Since we talked about the opposition, let me sort of ask you my next question. There's a divided opposition, and we know that the opposition in Uttar Pradesh, of course, you have the Samajwadi Party, you have the Bahujan Samaj Party, you have the BSP and the Congress, which has been in the doldrums for a while, but has been trying to milk this issue for whatever it's worth. So does a divided opposition have the wherewithal, in your mind, to mobilize on this issue or this incident?
So there are two things. One is, the mobilization on these issues, and second is the planning and organization of a campaign and the elaboration of a sound electoral strategy, which at least necessitate thinking about alliances. Everybody knows that a divided opposition cannot mount a serious challenge to an ultra-dominant BJP in the state of UP. And the opposition, as of now, is merely reacting on events. And it's not quite clear, what exactly are they doing in terms of capacity building, rebuilding, organizations, hiring party workers, designing a campaign strategy, thinking about, what are the ideas that they're going to defend beyond, the usual critique that they can mount and justifiably so against the governments. So they can add, and they will add, this event and the many other instances of violence that have occurred in UP, and they can try to puncture the government's claim that it's effective on crime. It's going to be a campaign issue for sure. But the larger question has to do with the organization of the opposition. Are they going to form an alliance? Are they going to fight separately? No one today expects a BSP-SP alliance. They tried in 2019. It actually failed. Even though it was a strong alliance on paper, it actually backfired. It didn't work. And the BSP today is very unlikely to get into a position of weakness, and therefore is unlikely to get into an alliance in which it is not at least an equal partner, right? So that factor alone provides the BJP with an enormous advantage. The Congress has been in the doldrum, in UP for a long time. They represent maybe 6 to 8% of the vote share. They could, lend support to the party best positioned today to challenge the BJP, and that would be the Samajwadi Party. They have worked together in the past, but past experience has shown that the Congress in UP tends to drag down an alliance, right? And so it's a question of balancing different parties' sense of status. Will the Congress accept to be part in an alliance, but get only a limited number of seats that it can contest? That does not really fit with the image, the inflated image it has about its own status, in UP right now. So at the moment, the landscape remains divided. Parties campaign separately, they're doing their things, separately. It would be obviously in their interests to think about campaign arrangement and alliance mechanisms ahead of the campaign, and not wait for the last moment to see whether, it still makes sense to do, this configuration or that configuration. They should rather make up their mind now and stick to the script. Instead, what we see today is still a very divided, fragmented opposition landscape, which plays in the advantage of the BJP. Right.
And you mentioned earlier the issue of law and order, and how the Chief Minister of Uttar Pradesh, Mr. Adityanath, projects himself as a Chief Minister for Law and Order. In your analysis, and you've done so much analysis of elections, not just in UP, but across India, does the issue of law and order, how does it sort of figure in the electoral, calculations of voters? Again, with the caveat that we have a limited understanding of the voter. Yes. But does the issue, do you think it figures highly, or is sort of counterintuitively does not actually?
Law and order has always been an issue in UP. there's always been a deficit of law and order.
Right.
There's always been an element of disorder and violence and chaos. It's a state where that's been marked by a deep level of diffused violence, permanent tensions between groups, type of politics that's very antagonistic or agonistic. And so it's always been an issue, right? And so every government, every party campaign, on this issue. And after a 5-year term, they're usually seen responsible, for the degradation of the law and order. This time, I feel it's a bit different because the BJP makes it really the heart of its, governance style and model. It's used the legislative route to create new mechanisms to fight against crime, which incidentally may have empowered the darker aspect of policing in crime fighting, in UP.
Right.
And it has done so in a way that sort of blends the domains of policing and the domains of, pursuing a political project that entails, the marginalization of minorities, but also the silencing of dissenters. And what we have seen in UP, and this is an issue that was important, goes way beyond merely electoral politics. What we've seen in UP over the past 5 years is a government that does not hesitate to use and instrumentalize draconian laws, the sedition laws, Section 144, the UAPA, to go after opponents, be it political opponents or dissenters among the citizenry. Journalists, activists have been arrested preventively, sometimes detained for more than a year without proper charges. From 2018 onwards, there's been a policy and even laws passed to encourage and even promote extrajudicial killings by the police, the encounter policy that was part of a larger policy against crime. When the anti-CAA protests took place in 2019, the UP government published the names, the phones, the addresses of protesters, including on giant hoardings in Lucknow, the state capital, which actually posed a threat to their lives. And during the second wave of COVID, UP became, to my knowledge, the only place in the world where anti-terror laws have been used to silence citizens and doctors who were merely reporting oxygen and medicine shortages. So the UP government makes the claim to be tough on crime, putting petty criminality or conventional criminality in the same bag, with any other form of dissent, as a way to criminalize citizens or activists who criticize its actions. And it does not hesitate to use violence in the name of fighting violence and crime. And so the argument that I make is that by routinely using the law as a political instrument, and at times as an instrument of state repression, the UP government has sort of redefined the meaning of the rule of law, not simply subverted it. And following this redefinition, the state's actions are unilateral, arbitrary, prone to turn victims into perpetrators, opposition and critics as co-conspirators. The state actions which claim legality also elude any form of accountability, including from the judiciary, which has been a silent spectator. And that's something that we saw in the Lakhimpur Kheri incident, at least during the first week after the incident, is that basically the perpetrator, the son of the minister, roamed free. There was mounting pressure. The police had no choice but to now put him under arrest. But the same kind of courtesy, the same kind of appearance of due process has not been extended to a great many people in the state. And so in this conception of the rule of law, the ruler is not the one who follows rule and ensures that the rules are applied equally to all, but he's the one who creates the rule and uses them to suit his political goals. That's what in political science we call rule by law rather than the rule of law. Right? And that's been a strong characteristic of the regime in Uttar Pradesh.
Right. That's a fascinating but also an ominous analysis. Finally, moving beyond UP, What kind of impact do you think the Lakhimpur Kheri incident will have on the farmers' movement, which of course has been on over the past several months and even during the pandemic? What is your analysis?
I see possibly two main effects. Firstly, this tragic incident undoubtedly will galvanize the movement. In UP, we see that the movement is actually already expanding beyond Western UP, where it's been contained, so far, precisely to Lakhimpur district, which incidentally is a district that has virtually no history of farmers' movement or agitation,
right.
in the past, right? That's the first effect. The second effect is that the Lakhimpur incident and the depiction of protesting farmers as separatists, as Khalistanis, makes the vilification of the farmers through the incident and even before that, makes the possibility of a negotiated settlement of the dispute even more tenuous than before. And the government, in a way, is not incentivized to sort of settle the matter, in a negotiated manner, because it knows that however strong, however resilient the movement is, it remains a movement fairly limited geographically, but also in terms of caste and class, right? The farming laws affect more, the relatively small middle class among farmers, those who exploit reasonably larger, land holdings. They are the ones who have the most to lose from these legislations and the grab of, market forces and private, agribusiness and agriculture. They are the ones who have the most to lose compared to the bulk of farmers who are engaged into subsistence agriculture, who are already suffering from a deep crisis of the sector, right? And so the bulk of farmers in UP, it's not those, Jats or related castes, relatively prosperous middle class farmer, but it's a large, landless laborers, agricultural laborers, small scale subsistence agriculture. These farmers are not part of the movement, and I don't see this last event has changing that aspect of the protest.
Right. Thank you, Gilles, for those deep insights, and looking forward to talking to you again soon on both Uttar Pradesh as well as Indian politics. If you're listening to South Asia Chat, thanks. If you wish to learn more about our work, visit us at isas.nus.edu.sg. Thank you and goodbye.